At Christmas dinner, my mom raised her glass and said, 70% of your bonus goes to your sister. The other 30 will help with heating. The candles flickered against the good china we only brought out when my income justified it. The table glowed in warm gold, all curated comfort and seasonal nostalgia. Aunt Lenora's sweet potato casserole steamed beside the turkey. Ashley sat across from me in a brand new wool coat draped over her chair like a trophy. I knew she hadn't bought it herself. My bonus had landed that morning. A five-figure number I'd earned after 12 months of 70-hour weeks, back-to-back meetings, and swallowing stress like it was caffeine. My boss had shaken my hand and said, "You outperformed every forecast." I remember feeling tall when he said it. I didn't feel tall anymore. To family, Mom continued, smiling that rehearsed smile she used whenever she was about to deliver something dressed up as generosity. To teamwork, to sharing blessings. We all agreed. We. I didn't know who we was. Ashley didn't even pretend to look surprised. She smirked into her wine glass like she'd just won a quiet bet. Aunt Lenora leaned toward me and whispered, "It's only fair, sweetheart. You're doing so well." Only fair. My fork paused midair. For a moment, I imagined flipping the table, letting the plates shatter, letting someone else clean up the mess for once. Instead, I folded my napkin slowly and said one word. Understood. I stood, kissed my mother on the cheek, poured the rest of my wine into the poinsettia plant by the window, and walked down the hall to the guest bedroom. 10 minutes later, I left. They didn't even notice I'd taken the card with me. I didn't grow up rich. We were lower middle class in a town that liked to pretend it wasn't. When my father left, I was 10. One morning, he was at the table reading the paper. The next, he was a story my mother told in tight-lipped fragments. She pivoted overnight from affectionate homemaker to martyr-in-chief. Every bill she paid became a speech, every sacrifice a headline. And when I turned 16 and got a job scooping ice cream for $7.50 an hour, something shifted. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a resource. Ashley was sensitive. That was the word Mom used, like it was a medical condition. Sensitive meant she couldn't handle retail because customers were mean. Sensitive meant she couldn't take full course loads because stress triggered her. Sensitive meant no one could tell her no without her spiraling into tears that lasted days. So I adjusted. I applied for scholarships. I stacked part-time jobs. I studied at night and worked through college without help. Meanwhile, Ashley took a break to focus on her mental health. Her break lasted 6 years. Every time I suggested she try something, even part-time, Mom's answer was automatic. You know she's fragile. The word became a shield, a sword, an excuse. My 20s blurred into spreadsheets and skipped birthdays. I paid off Mom's car loan when the transmission died. I covered Ashley's rent more times than I can count. I co-signed her second attempt at community college. She dropped out 2 weeks later because the professor's tone made her uncomfortable. Whenever I tried to draw a line, the guilt machine roared to life. You're the stable one, Mom would say softly. It's not fair to punish her for not being like you. Not fair. It wasn't fair that when I got promoted, no one asked how I felt, only how much the raise was. It wasn't fair that when Ashley overdrew her bank account, I'd get a voicemail from Mom, already crying. Just this once, honey. She's really trying. Trying looked a lot like scrolling through influencer reels on her couch while I wired money that could have been my down payment. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the narrative. Somewhere along the way, support became obligation. Help became expectation. I wasn't generous. I was required. 3 years ago, I got my first real bonus, $5,000. I booked a quiet weekend in the mountains. First vacation in years. I remember standing on a balcony, breathing cold pine air, and thinking, this is what my money feels like when it's mine. When I came back, Ashley was crying on Mom's porch. She'd missed rent again. Mom didn't ask if I could help. She handed me the overdue notice like a waitress dropping a bill. That was the day I started tracking everything. Every transfer, every Venmo, every grocery run, every overdraft fee. I created a private document titled, What I Gave. By this past fall, it had crossed $40,000. And still, when Ashley bought a brand new iPhone on Black Friday for self-care, Mom defended her. She deserves something nice. You wouldn't understand. She was right. I didn't understand entitlement. I understood budgets. I understood sacrifice. I understood saying no to myself. That was my sin. I functioned. And because I functioned, I funded. So when Mom stood at that Christmas table, lifting her glass with that steady, certain smile, when she declared that 70% of my bonus would wipe Ashley's debt and 30% would warm the house, something inside me didn't break. It calcified. I looked around that glowing table and realized no one had made eye contact with me during the announcement. They didn't need to. My compliance was assumed. My silence was part of the decor. That's when it hit me. I wasn't a son, I wasn't a brother. I was a line item. And the most painful realization wasn't that they wanted my money. It was that they believed they were entitled to it. That they believed they were fair. Ashley caught my eye before I stood. She gave the smallest nod, almost playful, like we were in on something together. We weren't. As I drove away that night, snow beginning to fall in soft, deceptive flakes, I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. Because Christmas dinner wasn't the first betrayal. It was the confirmation. The real fracture had happened a week earlier, when I received a phone call that made everything make sense. Every whisper, every entitlement, every smirk into a wine glass. And that was the night I decided no more. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was still at work. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. But something in me, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion, picked up. "Hey," a familiar voice said. "It's Marissa. From the nonprofit, we used to share a cubicle." I leaned back in my chair. "Yeah, of course. What's up?" There was a pause, papers shuffling. "This is awkward. Is your sister applying for our hardship wellness grant?" I frowned. "What grant?" Another pause, longer this time. "She listed you as her financial support. Said she's your dependent. That your family situation has been draining you emotionally. She wrote that you're on the edge of a breakdown." I felt something cold slip down my spine. "What exactly did she say?" I asked very carefully. Marissa hesitated. "She described you as emotionally unstable, financially controlling. She said you pressure her with money and threaten to withdraw support to manipulate her." The room around me went silent, like someone had sucked the air out. "I'm going to need a copy of that application," I said. She lowered her voice. "Off the record, I'll send it, but you didn't hear it from me." 10 minutes later, the PDF landed in my inbox. I opened it. There it was. My full name, my job title, my salary range, inflated but not by much. Screenshots of text messages I'd sent Ashley, stripped of context. One message where I'd written, "I think I need therapy. I'm tired of being the family ATM." In her version, that sentence became proof that I was unstable. She wrote that I weaponized money, that I dangled financial security over her head to control her behavior, that our mother had tried to mediate but feared my temper. My temper. I read it 3 times. She was applying for $7,500. And to get it, she painted me as abusive. What stunned me wasn't just the lie, it was the creativity of it, the way she'd flipped the narrative so cleanly. In her story, she was the fragile survivor. I was the volatile provider, cracking under pressure. She even wrote that she feared I would retaliate if I found out. I stared at that line for a long time. Retaliate. The irony was almost elegant. That night, I didn't call her. I didn't confront anyone. I sat in my apartment with the laptop open and let the truth settle. All those years of guilt. All those dinners where I swallowed resentment. All those whispers of, "It's only fair." They weren't just leaning on me. They were constructing a story where I was the villain if I stopped. Christmas Eve, a week later, was just confirmation. When Mom raised that glass and announced my bonus allocation like a boardroom decision, I realized something with terrifying clarity. They believed their own version. So that night, after I left the house and drove through falling snow, I didn't rage. I acted. 3 quiet moves. First, I logged into my banking app and froze the authorized users attached to my account. Second, I scheduled a call with my bank the next morning and closed the joint access entirely. Third, I transferred the remaining balance into a new account under a different institution, one no one knew about. No announcement, no warning. Just silence. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Or at least nothing on my end. On theirs, the card kept swiping. Groceries. A $212 brunch for Ashley and her friends labeled "Treat Yourself." Overpriced skincare. A yoga membership renewal. I watched the charges stack up like evidence. I let them. Then, on a Thursday night, my phone rang. "Mom," I answered calmly. "Sweetheart," she said, voice tight. "The card isn't working." I opened the banking app, though I already knew the answer. Strange. In the background, I heard Ashley's voice, shrill, panicked. "It declined at the pharmacy. They said insufficient funds." Mom's breathing quickened. "She needs her medication. You said the card was good through next year." I muted the phone and let myself inhale slowly. When I unmuted, my voice was steady. "I canceled it. Silence. Excuse me, Mom's tone sharpened. I closed the account, removed authorized users, took back my name. Ashley's voice cut in from the background. What is wrong with you? Mom tried to regain control. You knew we needed that money. Ashley has payments. We rely on that. Do you? I asked quietly. A beat. Because last week, Ashley applied for a wellness hardship grant listing herself as my dependent. She told a nonprofit that I'm emotionally unstable, that I financially coerce her. Dead air. Then Ashley's voice, smaller now. You weren't supposed to see that. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Supposed to? Mom stumbled over her words. She was just explaining the situation. You know how forms are. She exaggerated. She quoted my texts, I said. Out of context. She told strangers I'm abusive for $7,500. Ashley snapped, You don't understand what it's like. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied. You want my money, my labor, my silence. You just don't want me unless I'm useful. Mom's voice rose. You're overreacting. This is cruel. No, I said. This is the first honest thing I've done in years. There was a muffled sob. Maybe Mom, maybe Ashley. It didn't matter. You announced my bonus at Christmas, I continued. You didn't ask. You didn't even look at me. You assumed. We're family, Mom said weakly. Yes, I agreed. We are, and family doesn't file fraudulent applications calling each other unstable. Ashley started crying for real now, heavy and dramatic. You're ruining everything. No, I said. I'm finally reacting. I hung up before they could respond. My hands were shaking then, not from fear, but from something like release. For years I'd been careful, polite, measured. But politeness had built this system, and now the system had cracks. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, what I gave, and realized it wasn't just a record of money. It was a map of how far I'd let things go. And I wasn't done. Because canceling the card was only step one. They still thought this was a tantrum. They didn't yet understand that I had documentation, receipts, and I was about to bring them home. I didn't call before I went over that Saturday. I wanted the element of surprise, not for drama, for clarity. The banker's box sat in my passenger seat like a quiet witness. 5 years of statements, highlighted transfers, screenshots printed in color, a tabbed folder labeled Grant Application, another labeled Trust Inquiry. Though I didn't know how prophetic that one would become yet. At the time, it was just a placeholder for questions. Mom opened the door in her slippers. She looked smaller than I remembered. Puffy eyes, no makeup. You didn't answer my texts, she said, like that was the real offense. I know. Ashley's voice drifted from upstairs. Is he here? I stepped inside without waiting to be invited and placed the box on the dining table, the same table where my bonus had been redistributed like community property. What's this? Mom asked. Receipts. Ashley came down the stairs slowly, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. She avoided eye contact at first, then forced it. Are you trying to humiliate me? She asked. No, I said evenly. You already did that to yourself. I opened the box. Paper against wood. The sound was louder than it should have been. Every transfer from the last 5 years, I continued. Every rent payment, every overdraft fee, every cosign, every grocery run, total, $43,722. Mom sat down. Ashley crossed her arms. You didn't have to do that. You're right, I said. I didn't. Aunt Lenora appeared from the kitchen doorway like she'd been waiting for a cue. Now let's not air dirty laundry. Laundry? I snapped before I could stop myself. She filed a legal document calling me abusive. That's not laundry. That's arson. Ashley flinched. I slid the printed grant application across the table. You used my name, I said. My job. My private texts. You described me as volatile. Her jaw tightened. I was desperate. For what? A retreat? That was one time, she shot back. You don't know what it's like to feel behind all the time. To feel like everyone's judging you. I wasn't judging you, I said quietly. I was carrying you. Mom finally spoke. We were drowning. No, I said, looking at her. I was. Silence. I pulled one more envelope from the box and placed it on the table. $1,000, I said. Final contribution. Use it for heat. Prescriptions. Whatever you deem only fair. Ashley scoffed. You're cutting off your own family over money? I met her eyes. No, I'm cutting off my family because they treated me like money. Mom's face crumpled. You're really doing this. You raised me to believe family means showing up, I said. I showed up, every time, but you never showed up for me. Ashley's voice softened for the first time. We needed you. I know, I replied. That was the problem. I walked toward the door. Mom followed. What happens now? Now, I said, opening it. You figure it out. The cold air outside felt cleaner than anything inside that house. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel guilty. But they still thought it was temporary, that I'd cool off, resume autopay, slide back into position. They underestimated how tired I was. The heating bill went unpaid. Ashley's rent bounced. The pharmacy refused to fill her prescription without clearing the previous balance. Then the messages started. At first, soft. Are you okay? I know things got heated. You know Ashley is under pressure. Then sharper. You're punishing us. You're unstable lately. Family doesn't do this. Ashley tagged me in a Facebook post about toxic relatives who weaponize success against the vulnerable. I blocked her. Then everyone connected to her. My social media became silent. It felt like oxygen. 3 weeks in, an envelope arrived. Legal letterhead. Ashley was attempting to sue me for emotional damages, claiming financial abandonment and destabilizing the household. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I hired a lawyer. We presented everything. Bank records, the spreadsheet, the fraudulent grant application, screenshots where Ashley joked to a friend about finally getting free cash for once. The judge skimmed the documents, dismissed it in 10 minutes. Ashley wouldn't look at me as we left the courthouse. Mom did. Her expression wasn't anger, it was fear, like she was seeing, for the first time, that the system she built could collapse. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my apartment door. Not Mom, not Ashley. My father, the man who left when I was 10. He stood there holding a travel mug and a thin file folder. You got a minute? He asked. I stared at him. Older, grayer, smaller than the memory I carried. I stepped aside. He sat on my couch, looking around like he was trespassing. You did all right for yourself, he muttered. I didn't answer. He opened the folder. Inside was a trust document. My name on it, and Ashley's. Balance, $20,000. You were supposed to get this when you turned 25, he said. 10 each. I felt my pulse in my ears. Your mom told me you didn't want it, he continued. Said you were unstable, angry, that you threatened to call the police if I reached out. The word unstable again. I swallowed hard. I never said that. I figured, he said quietly. Found out last month. She used your half to cover Ashley's debts. Credit cards. Some wellness retreat thing. I stared at the numbers. $10,000. Gone. Not because I didn't exist. Because I was inconvenient. She told you I was dangerous? I asked. He nodded slowly. Said you were volatile. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All these years, I thought I had shut him out. That I was the cold one. But the story had been written for me again. He leaned back. You weren't the problem, son. You were the threat to her system. Threat. I'd never thought of myself that way. I took the folder from him. For years, I believed my father's absence was the original wound. But maybe the deeper cut was how that absence had been used. He stood to leave. I wasn't much of a father, he said at the door. But I didn't want this. Neither did I replied. When the door closed, I sat there for a long time. Every narrative I'd accepted felt unstable now. Every version of myself they'd handed me. Angry, volatile, selfish, crumbled. And for the first time, I understood something terrifying. I hadn't just been funding my family. I'd been protecting a lie. I didn't sleep that night. The trust document sat open on my kitchen table, like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized I was part of. My name printed neatly beside Ashley's. Equal shares, equal intention. $10,000. It wasn't life-changing money. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the story. For years, I believed my father's silence was mutual, that I'd inherited some coldness from him, that I'd chosen distance. But distance had been curated. I replayed his words. She said you were unstable. She said you threatened to call the police. She said you didn't want anything from me. Unstable, volatile, dangerous. The same language Ashley used in the grant application. It wasn't random. It was strategic. Mom had needed a villain in her narrative, someone strong enough to carry the weight, but flawed enough to justify exploiting them. And if I was unstable, then everything she did was protection. If I was volatile, then isolating me was safety. If I was selfish, then taking my inheritance was fairness. I leaned back in my chair and laughed once, a hollow sound in a quiet apartment. I had been fighting shadows. The next morning, I started writing. Not a text, not a reactive message. A statement, 3 copies. One for Mom, one for Ashley, one for the nonprofit. I attached everything. 5 years of transfers totaling over $44,000. Screenshots of Ashley calling me a gullible idiot who will always pay. The trust document showing my half siphoned without my knowledge. The grant application where she described me as emotionally abusive and financially coercive. At the bottom, I wrote, "You do not own me. You do not control me. I am not your safety net, your scapegoat, or your financial plan. From this moment forward, I owe you nothing. Consider this the last communication you will receive from me. I printed them on thick paper. No typos. No emotion. Just fact. 3 days later, I received a letter back. Not from Mom. Not from Ashley. From the nonprofit. They had opened an investigation. Ashley's grant had been revoked. They apologized for the oversight. They thanked me for bringing the matter forward. They offered therapy resources. At the bottom, one sentence. We believe you. I didn't expect that to undo me, but it did. I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet, steady tears. Because for the first time in years, someone looked at the same information and didn't twist it. They saw what I saw. It didn't end there. 2 weeks later, there was another knock at my door. Aunt Lenora. No fur coat, no lipstick, no casserole. Just a wrinkled envelope and red eyes. I didn't know, she said before I could speak. I swear, I didn't know. I let her in. She didn't sit on the couch like she owned it. She perched on the edge. I always believed your mom, she continued. She's convincing. She made it sound like you were hard, like you were pulling away because you thought you were better than everyone. I said nothing. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. I'm sorry for the dinners, for the whispers, for saying it's only fair when it wasn't. You were never selfish. You were strong, and we were too cowardly to admit it. My throat tightened. I left her orbit, Aunt Lenora said quietly. I had to. I can't pretend anymore. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It was small, honest. I stepped forward and hugged her. It was the first time in years that a family embrace didn't feel like a transaction. After she left, the silence in my apartment felt different. Not empty. Earned. Mom didn't call. She sent emails from burner accounts instead. Long explanations, circular logic, phrases like miscommunication and family pressure. She never denied using the trust. She framed it as necessary. Ashley posted passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and narcissistic relatives. Her followers commented with heart emojis. But the system was fractured. The nonprofit investigation rippled outward. Ashley lost access to more than just the grant. She lost credibility. Word travels quietly in small nonprofit networks. Dad started sending postcards, short ones. A pier at sunset, a mountain trail. Once, a boat sketch with the words, thinking of you. Hope you're still boxing. He sent a check for $500 once with a note. Buy something unnecessary. I framed the note. Not the money. The note, because there were no strings attached. No, we all agreed. No expectation. Just giving. And in the middle of rebuilding myself, I realized something else. Mom hadn't just needed my money. She needed my silence. Because silence keeps narratives intact. And once I stopped playing my role, everything she built started to crack. But the story wasn't finished. Because closure doesn't arrive like a movie ending. It comes in pieces. And sometimes it comes in the form of a letter you don't expect. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Real paper, real stamp, my name spelled correctly. I almost didn't open it. Mom's handwriting was tight, controlled, the same way she used to label leftovers in the fridge. I made coffee first, sat at the small table in my loft, the secondhand bookshelf behind me, half filled, morning light through exposed brick. Then I opened it. I never realized how deeply we failed you. I thought I was protecting the vulnerable, but I forgot that you were vulnerable too. I let you carry us and blamed you when you collapsed. It wasn't a full apology. There was no, I stole from you. No, I lied to your father. No, I weaponized you. But it was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging the weight I'd been carrying. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond, because that letter wasn't for me. It was for her. A confession whispered into paper so she could sleep at night. Let her sleep. I was already resting. Life in the loft settled into rhythm. No overdraft alerts. No frantic voicemails. No, we need to talk. The silence used to terrify me. Now it felt orchestral. I joined a boxing class 3 blocks away. The first night, I hit the heavy bag until my knuckles ached. The instructor nodded and said, "You've been holding something in." He had no idea. I started sleeping through the night. No more 2 a.m. guilt spirals. No more rehearsing conversations in my head where I tried to be both generous and small. Ashley stopped contacting me directly after the nonprofit investigation concluded. I heard through Aunt Lenora that she moved back in with Mom full-time, working part-time at a yoga studio, still finding herself. I hope she does, but I won't be there when she does. Dad's postcards kept coming. Short messages, a sketch of a harbor. Proud of you. A blurry photo of a roadside diner. Still boxing? We don't talk about the past much. Maybe one day we will. Maybe we won't. But when he gives, it doesn't feel like a test. It feels like a bridge. Aunt Lenora invited me to Christmas this year. I left your mother's orbit, she said gently over the phone. It won't be the same table. I looked around my apartment, at the record player I bought with no justification, at the framed note that said, "Buy something unnecessary," at the quiet that belonged to me. Maybe next year, I told her. She understood. Sometimes I think about that first Christmas toast. What would have happened if I'd smiled? If I'd clinked my glass and handed over the money? Ashley would have gotten her 70%. Mom would have warmed the house. The nonprofit grant might have gone through. My father would still believe I hated him. And I would still be the stable one, the reliable one, the ATM with a pulse. Instead, I said, understood. And I made 3 quiet moves. I didn't flip a table. I didn't scream. I didn't burn the house down. I turned off autopay. That's all it took to expose a system built on my silence. They called me selfish, cruel, unstable, ungrateful. Let them. Because one day you sit at your own table, in your own space, with your name on the mailbox and no one reaching into your pockets, and you realize something they never wanted you to know. You were never the problem. You were the solution they couldn't control. And once you stop solving them, you finally start solving yourself.